Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils.
This Vsauce video stuck with me, especially the part when Michael says this.
I think historians in the far future will consider this the defining relic of our time.
The relic he's talking about is a photographic plate from 1826 by French physicist Joseph Nicephore Niepce, the earliest surviving photograph taken by a human, which means that cameras or photography has been a part of the human experience for roughly 200 years. Vsauce also turned me on to Susan Sontag and her book on photography, which pressed me to reconsider my entire relationship and understanding of photographic images. And it revealed to me how much imagery has replaced words in our culture.
I think it's more and more foisted on us by our televisual culture.
If Abraham Lincoln was the president who had the strongest grasp of the written word, then Donald Trump is certainly the president with the strongest grasp of the photographic image. We've recently been reminded of the impact that an image can have, what it can say, how it can move us as a collective. For a society that runs on images, how well do we understand the effects photography has on our minds? How do we receive and interpret that information? These were the questions that were on Sontag's mind half a century ago, and they're worth revisiting. The essays in her book specifically reflect on still photography, but I think we can apply a lot of her observations to film and video in today's media environment. In this essay, I want to explore the idea that coexisting for these 200 years with cameras has altered our human behavior and our intelligence more than we know. Photography has folded and twisted reality upon itself over and over into a dazzling labyrinth of confusion, pleasure, pain, truth, and falsehoods. This multiverse, now distributed by the internet, social media, the news, and advertising, is our image world. It can collectively be thought of as a projection, or even a shadow cast by the collective human mind, emerging from trillions of shutter clicks and flashbulb pops and touchscreen taps. George Orwell envisioned an authoritative state with seemingly limitless power to surveil its people. An eye that constantly watches. And many today still fear that Orwell's depiction of Big Brother in 1984 was prophecy of a panopticon society that we're currently seeing be constructed. And this may be true for states where power is centralized. However, what I believe we're witnessing today in America is different. I'm not sure what to call it. It's a free market of observation, exhibitionism, and cultural policing. We are not being surveilled by the state as much as we are surveilling each other through social media, through cameras.
Excuse me, did you take my charger?
The photographic reality is gaining more gravity and flipping the balance of power. Are the photos still the shadows that we cast, or are we now their shadows? My hope, which I think was Sontag's hope, is that a sobering look at the camera rather than through it can prepare us for what will be an even larger leap into the realm of synthetic imagery that we're just now taking our first steps towards, with the dawn of large language models and their ability to mimic and entirely fabricate photographs of a reality that is not our own. In the early days of photography, it was seen as something supernatural, and in some ways frightening. The camera defied our understanding of the laws of nature and time. Some actually believed that photography captured a fragment of the human soul, so there was naturally some resistance to it, as well as some opportunities to exploit the public's misunderstandings of the science behind it.
The early stages of photography, it was very inaccessible to a lot of people because it's expensive, requires all these dangerous chemicals, right? It's really almost like a hobby for chemists and eccentric people. Mid-1850s America, one of probably the wildest places in history, on the eve of the Civil War, but also coming out of the Second Great Awakening. One of the other movements that came out of upper state New York in this time was also spiritualism. This idea that people can, in fact, communicate with spirits or the dead.
Photographers like William Mumler took advantage of the spiritualist movement and convinced many paying customers that he had the ability to photograph them with the spirits of their lost loved ones standing next to them.
And there really was no explanation for this other than photographers who knew that this was, in fact, a superimposition. Spiritualists jumped on this. They're like, here is proof. Here is scientific proof that ghosts and spirits exist. These new machines that we have called cameras and photography is able to unlock the spirit world.
In the aftermath of the Civil War, Americans were desperate to connect with the dead, but some thought that Mumler was taking advantage of Americans' grief, so he was brought to trial for fraud. Photography was still such a new technology they could not convincingly prove his fraud, and so his trial acted more as an advertisement. And eventually he was asked to photograph the former First Lady. His scheme revealed the intuitive relationship that humans had with photography, which was a way to converse with the past, but also a confirmation of what we already believed to be true.
I'm a little worried about the extent to which we take images as telling us very much. My feeling is more we remember through images, but we understand through words.
And even today, there's an undeniably ghost-like quality to photography, as well as cinema. We can experience the vitality, the human spirit of those who have passed. And there's also an authority held by photographs of history. The mind is moved and molded by these images. These are the moments that meant something, that changed the story of us. This miracle of capturing sight has allowed so many to take in the same visual breadcrumbs of time, yet also interpret history through their own private reasoning, constructing their very own narrative. And this process, to a very large degree, has been absent of words. Many of these images have been seen yet not discussed, felt but not understood. Francis Fukuyama's The End of History was a strong indication that photography had cast a spell over the human mind. In his original 1989 essay, he began with, "In watching the flow of events over the past decade or so, it is hard to avoid the feeling that something very fundamental has happened in world history." His article stirred a large response and has since been criticized as a strikingly large misread of the direction society was heading. That assumption that history could be watched explains why Fukuyama could believe that he was witnessing a resolution of human conflicts, the final scenes of a film prior to the credits rolling. And it's hard to blame him for feeling this way. When you really think about the dramatic arc of the 20th century and the images that were permanently etched into the collective consciousness, it's hard to unsee that narrative, a powerful one, culminating in the rise of democracy, liberalism, capitalism, modernization, and the internet, which was the perfect distribution network for images. What was born as an avenue to communicate with the dead was now a widely used visual vocabulary and a shortcut to grasping the past. This is what happened before I was born, why the world is the way it is now, why women can vote, why war is wrong, what a bad guy looks like, why racism ended, what an assassination looks like, what a desirable man looks like, or a desirable woman, sadness, death, pain, progress, revolution, honor, desire, sex, youth, success. An entire template of human existence and meaning had become a picture book that one way or another we each flipped through and consumed as the story of reality.
You know, how you remember things is not necessarily the way it actually happened, but it's the way you remember it. And it's maybe even more valid than the actual thing. some ways.
Generally, it is not understood yet that problem of the same magnitude is that we do not have adequate images, and that's what I'm working on, a new grammar of images.